He was his father's favorite son. His father loved and cherished him more than his older brothers, and for that, his brothers sold him and lied to their father that he had been killed by a wild animal. Years later, his life changed and the same brothers bowed to him. In a small village, nestled between rolling hills and a wide river, there lived a man named Mr. Tunde. He was well respected among his people, a farmer with good land, a kind heart, and 3 sons he had raised on his own after their mother passed. His 2 older sons, Dayo and Remy, were strong and capable. They worked the farm, carried the harvest, and did what was expected of them. But Kojo, the youngest, was different. There was something about the boy that made Mr. Tunde's eyes linger a little longer and his smile come a little easier. Kojo was sharp. He listened when elders spoke. He asked questions that made grown men pause and think. He had a warmth about him that drew people in, and Mr. Tunde, whether he knew it or not, made very little effort to hide how he felt about his youngest son. One dry season morning, Mr. Tunde returned from the village market with a gift, a fine hand-woven robe, rich in color, the kind worn by chiefs and men of standing. He walked past Dayo and Remy without a word and placed it gently on Kojo's shoulders. "This is for you," he said, his eyes full of pride. Kojo smiled and thanked his father. Dayo and Remy stood watching. They said nothing, but something shifted that day. At mealtimes, Mr. Tunde would call Kojo to sit closest to him. When visitors came, it was Kojo he introduced first. When a decision needed to be made about the farm, Mr. Tunde would sometimes ask for Kojo's thoughts, even before asking his older brothers. Dayo noticed every single one of these moments. Remy noticed too, but it was Dayo who let it fester. He began to see Kojo not as a brother, but as a problem. A boy who had done nothing to earn his place, yet stood at the front of everything. "Father treats him like a prince," Dayo muttered to Remy one evening as they sat outside after supper. "And what are we? Nothing, just hands for the farm." Remy kept quiet, but he did not disagree. Kojo, for his part, was unaware of the storm building around him. He went about his days helping his father, learning, growing. He had no enemies in his heart, least of all his brothers. He simply lived the way a boy who has never been given a reason to worry tends to live. But envy does not need an invitation. It grows on its own, quietly, in the hearts of those who feel overlooked. And in the hearts of Dayo and Remy, it had already taken root. Not long after the robe incident, Kojo had a dream. It was vivid, the kind of dream that stays with you even after the sun is fully up and the morning is loud around you. He sat up on his mat, heart still racing, the images fresh in his mind. At breakfast, before wisdom could advise him otherwise, Kojo spoke. "I had a strange dream last night," he said, reaching for his food. Mr. Tunde looked up with interest. Dayo and Remy continued eating. "Tell us," said Mr. Tunde. Kojo set down his bowl. "We were all in the field, bundling the harvest. My bundle stood up on its own, straight and tall. Then your bundles," he looked at Dayo and Remy, "they turned and bowed down to mine." Silence. Dayo slowly put down his spoon and looked at Kojo with eyes that had gone cold. "Bowed down?" he said quietly. "So you will be our king one day? Is that what you are telling us?" Kojo shook his head. "I am only telling you what I dreamed. I did not choose it." "Then keep such dreams to yourself," Dayo said, and picked his spoon back up. Mr. Tunde said nothing to correct Kojo, and that silence was not lost on Dayo. He pushed back from the table and left without finishing his food. Remy followed without a word. If their resentment had been a small fire before, the dream poured oil on it. Dayo could barely look at Kojo after that morning. The sight of him in that fine robe walking the compound like he belonged at the front of everything now had a story attached to it. A boy who dreamed of being bowed to. "He has their father completely fooled," Dayo told Remy later that evening. "And now he's putting ideas in his own head, big ideas, dangerous ideas for a small boy."
Remy shifted uncomfortably. It was just a dream, Dio. Dreams become plans, and plans become actions. I have seen how father looks at him. If we do nothing, one day that boy will be standing over everything that should be ours. Remy had no answer for that. Meanwhile, Mr. Tunde quietly thought about what his youngest son had shared. He did not fully understand it, but something in him did not dismiss it either. He had always believed Kojo carried something special. Whether that dream was a sign or simply the imagination of a young boy, he could not be sure. But he tucked it away in his heart, the way fathers tend to do with things they cannot yet explain. Kojo slept peacefully that night, unbothered and unaware. His brothers did not sleep as well.
A few days later, Mr. Tunde called Kojo into the house. "Your brothers went to tend the farm on the other side of the hill this morning," he said. "I have not heard from them since. Go and check on them. Make sure all is well." Kojo nodded, put on his robe, and set off. He walked for a while before he spotted them near the riverbank, resting under a tree instead of working. Dio saw him first, that colorful robe visible from a distance, catching the light as Kojo made his way down the slope. Dio stood up slowly. "Look who is coming," he said, his voice low and flat. The dreamer himself. Something had been building in Dio for days. The robe, the dream, their father's face every time Kojo entered a room. It had all gathered into one hard, ugly decision. "I am tired of this," Dio said. "I am tired of him." Remy looked up. "What are you saying?" "I am saying we end this today." Remy got to his feet. "Dio, there are traders passing through this afternoon. I spoke to one of them yesterday at the market. They're heading east and they buy and sell everything." He paused, "including people." Remy stared at his brother. "He is our blood." "He is father's favorite. There is a difference." Dio's jaw was set. "We sell him, we take the money, we go home and tell father a wild animal attacked him on the road. It ends there." Remy opened his mouth, then closed it. He did not have the strength to fight Dio, and perhaps a part of him that he would never admit out loud did not want to. By the time Kojo reached them, smiling, asking if everything was all right, the decision had already been made. They grabbed him. Kojo struggled and called out, but they were bigger, and there were two of them. By the time the traders arrived at the riverbank, the deal was done, quickly, quietly, and without ceremony. The traders handed over their coins, bound Kojo's wrists, and continued east without looking back. Dio stared at the money in his hand for a moment, then pocketed it. On the way home, they killed a small bush animal and smeared its blood on Kojo's robe. When they arrived and placed it before Mr. Tunde, they told him they had found it on the road. "We think an animal attacked him. We searched everywhere, we could not find him." Mr. Tunde took one look at the robe and collapsed into grief so deep it shook the walls of the house. He wept for days, and Dio and Remy went back to their lives, carrying something they would never be fully able to put down. The traders sold Kojo to a wealthy chief in a kingdom far to the east, a prosperous land of wide markets, tall granaries, and busy roads. The chief's name was Oba Farouk, and he ran his household with order and high expectations. Kojo arrived with nothing. No robe, no name that anyone recognized, no father to speak on his behalf. He was a boy far from home, with bound wrists and a heart full of confusion. But Kojo was not the kind to stay broken for long. He did not know why his brothers had done what they did. He had replayed that morning at the riverbank many times in his head, searching for something he might have done wrong. Eventually, he stopped searching and made a quiet decision within himself. He would survive, and he would do it with his head up. From his first week in Oba Farouk's household, Kojo worked without complaint. He carried, he cleaned, he listened carefully to instructions and followed them without needing to be told twice. When others rested lazily, Kojo found something useful to do. When problems came up in the household, he offered solutions that were calm and practical. Oba Farouk began to notice. Within a year, Kojo was no longer doing the lowest work. He was managing other servants, keeping records of supplies, and organizing the daily running of the compound. The chief trusted him with keys, with money, with information. Whatever Kojo touched seemed to find order. But beyond his work ethic, there was something else about Kojo that people in the household began to whisper about. He could interpret dreams. It started small. A fellow servant mentioned a troubling dream over breakfast one morning, and Kojo listened carefully and offered what he felt it meant. 3 days later, events unfolded exactly as Kojo had described. Word spread quietly throughout the compound. Oba Farouk heard about it. One evening, the chief summoned Kojo and shared a dream that had disturbed his sleep for several nights. Kojo listened without interrupting, thought carefully, and then spoke plainly. "There are good years coming, my chief," he said. "Years of abundance, but they will be followed by years of lack. If the kingdom stores wisely during the good years, the lean years will not destroy you." Oba Farouk studied the young man standing before him. "And who taught you to read dreams?" he asked. "No one," Kojo said simply. "It is something I carry." The chief was quiet for a long moment, and then he made a decision that surprised his entire court. He appointed Kojo as his head overseer, the man responsible for managing the kingdom's food stores and preparing for whatever was coming. Kojo, the boy who had been sold at a riverbank for a handful of coins, now held the keys to an entire kingdom's survival. He had not forgotten home. He never would. But home would have to wait. Kojo's dream interpretation had been correct in every detail. For several years, Oba Farouk's kingdom enjoyed good harvests. Crops grew tall, the markets overflowed, and the granaries filled steadily under Kojo's careful watch. He made sure nothing was wasted. Every surplus was stored, recorded, and protected. The people of the kingdom lived well, and Oba Farouk's name grew even greater across the land. Then, the rain stopped. Not gradually, they simply stopped. The rivers thinned, the soil cracked, and crops that had been planted with hope came up dry and brittle. What followed was a famine that spread like a shadow across the region, reaching village after village, kingdom after kingdom, sparing no one. But Oba Farouk's kingdom had food. Because of Kojo, they had prepared. The granaries that had been filling for years now became the most important buildings in the land. Word spread quickly to surrounding territories that this was the one place where grain could still be bought. People came from near and far, arriving dusty and desperate, and Kojo managed it all, the distribution, the pricing, the records, with the same quiet efficiency he had always carried. Far away, back in the village between the hills and the river, Mr. Tunde's household was suffering. The old man had never fully recovered from losing Kojo. He had grown quieter over the years, thinner, slower. Dayo and Remy ran the farm, but without the usual rains, there was little to harvest. The food stores they had were shrinking fast, and the dry season showed no sign of ending. Mr. Tunde gathered his sons one evening. "I have heard there is a kingdom to the east that has grain. People are traveling there to buy. You two must go before what we have runs out completely." Dayo and Remy exchanged a glance but said nothing unusual. This was practical. This was survival. They packed what they could for the journey and prepared to leave. That night, alone in his room, Dayo sat quietly with his thoughts. He had not spoken Kojo's name in years, not once. He had buried it the same way he had buried the memory of that afternoon at the riverbank. Life had continued, the farm had continued. Their father's grief had eventually quieted to a dull sadness that lived in his eyes. But the guilt had never fully left. It lived in small moments, in the way Mr. Tunde sometimes stared at an empty corner of the room, or in the way Remy would go unusually quiet on certain evenings for no clear reason. Dayo pushed the thoughts aside and went to sleep. The next morning, he and Remy set off east toward the prosperous kingdom, toward the man who held the food that would save their family. They did not know they were walking toward their brother. The journey east took Dayo and Remy 3 days on foot. By the time they arrived at Oba Farouk's kingdom, they were tired, dusty, and humbled by the road. Around them, they could see others who had made the same journey, men and women from different villages, all arriving with the same desperate need.
The kingdom was everything the rumors had promised. The market were orderly, the streets were busy, and the granary stood tall and full at the center of it all. Guards directed newcomers to a large open hall where requests for grain were processed and approved. At the front of that hall sat the overseer. Dio and Remy joined the line and waited. When their turn came, they walked forward and stopped before the man seated at the table. Following the custom of the kingdom, they lowered their heads respectfully and stated their request. "We have come from a village to the west," Dio said, head still slightly bowed. "We are asking to purchase grain for our household. Our father is old and our land has nothing left to harvest." There was a pause. They looked up. The man at the table was well-dressed, composed, and completely still. He was staring at them with an expression they could not immediately read. Not hostile, not warm, simply steady, like a man who had just seen something he had been quietly expecting for a long time. Kojo looked at his brothers. They did not recognize him. Years had passed. He had grown, filled out, and was dressed or beclothing of authority. Nothing about this setting connected him to the boy they had grabbed at a riverbank and handed to strangers for coins. But Kojo knew them immediately. Dio's jaw, Remy's eyes, the way Dio stood slightly in front, always the one to speak first. Nothing had changed. Kojo felt something move through his chest, a wave of emotions he could not fully name: shock, grief, and anger, and something else underneath all of it that he did not yet have words for. He kept his face still. "Where exactly is your village?" he asked, his voice calm and official. Dio answered. Kojo asked more questions about their household, how many people needed feeding, whether they had come alone. He was not interrogating them, he was listening, watching, studying the men his brothers had become. Then he told them their request was approved, but that they were to return the following morning to collect the grain. In the meantime, arrangements would be made for them to rest within the compound. Dio thanked him, and they stepped aside. As soon as they were out of sight, Kojo stood up quietly, walked to a back room, and sat down alone. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel everything he had been carrying. Then he composed himself, stood up, and began to think carefully about what came next.
The next morning, Dio and Remy returned to the hall as instructed. The overseer was already there, waiting. But today, something about him felt different. The official distance from the day before was gone. He had dismissed his attendants, and the hall was quiet, just the three of them. He gestured for them to come closer. Dio stepped forward cautiously. Remy followed. The overseer looked at them for a long moment. Then he spoke in a voice that was no longer formal. "Tell me about your father," he said quietly. "Is he well? Is he still alive?" Dio blinked, caught off guard by the question. "He is alive, old, and not as strong as he used to be, but alive. He misses..." He stopped himself. "He misses who?" the overseer asked. Dio said nothing. The overseer stood up slowly from his seat and took a few steps toward them. His eyes were steady, but something in them had shifted. Something raw and deep that neither brother could explain. "I am going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully." He paused. "I am Kojo." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Remy's hand went to his mouth. Dio went completely rigid, the color draining from his face as his eyes searched the man standing before him. The jaw, the eyes, the way he tilted his head slightly when he spoke. It was him. It was Kojo. Dio started, but nothing followed. For the first time in his life, words failed him entirely. Kojo looked at his brothers, two men unraveling before him, and felt the last of his anger quietly leave. What replaced it was something older and deeper than anger had ever been. "What you did to me at that river," Kojo said evenly, "was wrong. I will not pretend otherwise." He paused. "But I have had many years to think about it, and what I know now is this. Everything that happened brought me here, to this position, to this moment where I can save lives, including yours." Remy was weeping openly. Even Dio's eyes had gone wet, his proud jaw trembling. "I am not your enemy. I am your brother." He stepped forward and embraced them both, first Remy, then Dio, who held on longer than expected, his shoulders shaking with the weight of years he had spent outrunning what he had done. When they finally pulled apart, Kojo looked at them with clear eyes. He said, "Go home, take the grain, take enough for the road, and bring our father back with you." He smiled for the first time. It is time he knew his son is alive. Dio and Remy left that afternoon loaded with more grain than they had come hoping for, and for the first time in years, they walked with something lifted off their backs.
Dayo and Remy arrived home to find Mr. Tunde sitting outside in his usual spot, watching the road the way old men do when life has taught them to wait. He looked up as his sons approached. He could see immediately that something was different about them. The way they walked, the way they looked at him. Something had shifted in both of them, and it showed in their faces before either one opened his mouth. "Father," Dayo said, kneeling before him, "we have something to tell you." Mr. Tunde straightened slowly. "Speak." Dayo looked at Remy, then back at his father. He had rehearsed this moment the entire journey home and still did not feel ready for it. "Kojo is alive." Mr. Tunde stared at him. "Father, Kojo is alive. He is the overseer of Oba Farouk's kingdom. He is the one who controls the grain stores. He is the reason people across the land are not starving." Dayo's voice cracked. "And he wants you to come to him." The old man said nothing for a very long time. Then his eyes filled with tears that spilled over without permission, running down the deep lines of his face. His hands, resting on his knees, began to tremble. "My son," he whispered, "my boy is alive." He asked no questions that evening about how or why. There would be time for all of that later. That night, he simply sat with the news, holding it carefully like something fragile, afraid that if he gripped it too tightly, it might turn out to be a dream. But it was not a dream. 3 days later, Mr. Tunde made the journey east, supported by his sons on either side. When they arrived at the kingdom, word was sent ahead. Kojo was already walking out through the main gates before the old man had fully come to a stop. Mr. Tunde saw him from a distance. Even after all the years, even dressed in the robes of authority and standing in a land far from home, there was no mistaking him. That walk, that face, the same boy he had placed a robe on all those years ago. "Kojo!" The old man's voice broke before he could say another word. Kojo crossed the remaining distance between them in quick strides and caught his father in an embrace that held everything. The years of separation, the grief, the survival, the long road back to each other. Mr. Tunde wept without restraint, his frail hands gripping his son's robe tightly as if letting go was something he was no longer willing to do. "I thought I had lost you," he managed between tears. "I am here, father. I am here." They stood like that for a long time, father and son, while the world around them quietly carried on. Some things, once broken, do not simply heal. They grow back stronger, deeper, and more precious than before. And in that embrace, a family that had been shattered at a riverside was finally, completely made whole.